Action.
All right. All right. So this is episode 41 for us. So we're cruising through these things. So today we've got a gentleman with 20 plus years of experience.
Yep.
It's been in business a little while, huh?
Yep.
Yeah. Matin Haghkar, and we're going to be talking about a few things here. Broker owning. You're the owner also.
Yep.
So what it's like to own a real estate agency, property management. We're going to get into development, a little bit of real estate investing, and then we'll see where the conversation goes from there. I believe we'll get some good stories out of this. So thanks for coming on, Matin. So before we get into anything, you just take a minute or two and give everybody a little background on yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian. So my name is Matin Haghkar. I own a Remax Plus, a Remax franchise with 30 realtors. We also own a property management business, over 1,000 units under management. Been in the business for 20 years, like you said. We also have a development business, partnered in a mortgage business, and pretty much everything real estate. Yep.
Cool. What do you think about the new Remax logo?
So it's kind of a modernized font of the old logo, but I think if you take a poll of Remax agents and franchisees, you'd probably get 50-50 that, like the old one versus the new one. But I think they went with just like a more modern font.
I think they murdered the balloon.
Yeah, I think the balloon seemed to be maybe a little old-fashioned to some people. Maybe they should replace it with a robot drone, logo.
Yeah.
I don't know, but
I've seen some pretty funny takes on that. Why Remax?
So I originally, I was an agent with Keller Williams and a bunch of other brokerages before that. I was with Coldwell Banker, Berkshire, ERA, bounced around a little, but I was with Keller Williams the longest. And Remax approached me with the opportunity. They came to me. I didn't seek them out.
You weren't a broker before Remax?
No, I was not a broker, and I was just an agent, like a high producing agent. And they, scouted me out, and they were on this like expansion campaign to open up a bunch of franchises. And they said, based on, experience, sales volume, demographics, whatever, you'd be a good candidate. Went through the interview process, and during that time, I did interview. Since once that opportunity came up, I thought to myself, well, I should shop around to see what other options there are and what makes sense. And, I'm not one of those people that's like, I'm a, super Remax or super this brand or that brand. It's more so, whatever, honestly, franchise or brand gave me the best name recognition, but also the best value and the best cost for what they were providing. And when I went through that process, they were giving me, quote unquote, the best deal. And I think it's because they were going through that expansion process. Maybe they're losing some, ground to other brokerages, other franchises. So they were going through this expansion. And I think because of that, they gave me a pretty great offer. And I've been with them since 2015, roughly. So about 10 years. So we went through a couple of franchise renewals. And even during that process, they're probably not going to want to hear this. I've shopped around, interviewed with other franchises to see who would offer us the best deal, and they still give us the best deal, in my opinion. And because of that, we're able to give our agents a super good deal as well, because it kind of trickles down. The less they charge us, the less we can charge them. And another thing I liked was the freedom they give us to run our own business versus some other franchises. They had a lot more top-down control. Okay. So that was a big part of it.
Awesome. Did they kind of, when you said they approached you with an opportunity, was the brokerage that's now yours, was it already kind of in play, or did you start this thing like flat with nothing?
Flat with nothing, and originally it was just me and my girlfriend at the time. Now she's my wife, and it was just us two, wearing every hat, marketing, admin, all of it. So it was a challenge, but when we first started, we were very aggressive and working 80 hours a week, all that stuff. And we just kept growing it and growing it. And, we were in a good market. We're in King of Prussia area, so that was great. And, the real estate market obviously took off since then till recently. And that really helped. But, yeah, we started from scratch. And actually, even when we started, I wasn't even a broker. And when I started, I actually brought in a broker to be the broker for the business. It was a kind of a weird relation. I brought in a broker, but I was the business owner.
Okay.
And then eventually I got my broker's license and I became the broker and they were, removed.
Okay. Cool. What I don't know. I don't know if I told you this. So I'm a former realtor myself. I kind of pretty versed in the industry. You hear from a lot of agents, a lot of successful agents, which clearly you're one, that it's not worth going and owning your own brokerage if you're kicking ass. So how do you view it? Is it worth it?
So I found out later the hard way. No, it's not. But I think in everything in life, it's what you make out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And to be frank, off of my sales, I was making a lot more money before I opened the brokerage. I got my real estate license in about 2009, or no, I'm sorry, no, 2004. I got it. And, when I first started, the commission splits were roughly 50-50, 60-40. The standard commission you would charge was a 6% commission. And ever since then till now, those commissions have gone from 6% to 5% to, if you're a developer, you get an even better deal. And then the commission splits have also gone from, 50-60 to 70-80, whatever, transaction fees and very aggressive, splits. So that double pressure has made it so the brokerage barely makes any money. And then when you factor in, okay, I have my franchise, so I'm at let's say a 99% split, whereas I was an agent, I was at a whatever split. That difference in your split doesn't account for admin fee, overhead, rent, utilities, all those things. So it ends up netting not a lot. And just being honest, we barely make any money off the brokerage, even though we have tremendous sales. We're in the top 1% of our market. We crush it. But despite that, we barely make anything for the brokerage side. However, if you have this bigger picture, I think, mindset where, okay, you think of the brokerage as a marketing arm for all these other auxiliary businesses. So maybe you get into property management, it feeds the property management business. Maybe you get into mortgage, it feeds the mortgage business. Maybe you get into insurance, it feeds that, title, whatever. Obviously having affiliate agreements and being RESPA compliant, but it does become a marketing arm for everything else, especially if you have a name brand that helps attract business. So
that was going to be my next question. So what are the benefits? So that sounds like a good benefit. It's almost like a base / hub for you to expand in other directions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What aside from that, what other benefits would you, maybe it's something just like a personal thing for you that you get out of it? What else would you say is a benefit to owning a brokerage?
So it's definitely opened a lot of doors, and it gives you a lot more insight into the industry and business, and a lot better for networking, having connections with other broker owners, developers. And, I'm a big, my passion personally is owning real estate, developing real estate, owning rental property, all that stuff. So it's really also helped me expand my, property ownership, my development business. Like I said, property management. Our property management business manages a ton of my own properties in addition to a lot of other customers. So it's opened up all these doors and gives you, a little more, not to sound silly, but legitimacy in the industry.
Okay. You're correct. I mean, it seems like all the commission splits are getting better for the agents, right? Obviously, that's not as good for the brokerages. The commissions are going down. That's something that's got to be more managed by the agents themselves to benefit from that. What do you think that's a good thing for the industry? And I'm going to tell you why I'm asking that, because a lot of these agents are going around hunting to pay like nothing for these things, and they're getting pretty good deals in a lot of places. But is that fostering better agents, or is that just helping people that maybe wouldn't last in the business that long because of fees and things they had to pay if they weren't doing well? But now it's like it's such a minor cost to be a realtor now that it can keep maybe not as good agents in the business longer.
Yeah, I think looking at like free market economics, the number one issue is the barrier to entry is too low.
Agreed.
Anybody can get their license. It's like 60 hours of class. You can take the test as many times as you want. You don't need any formal education. You don't need any formal professional experience, nothing. So I think that is the core issue, the barrier to entry being too low. But on the flip side, I think it's just free market economics as to where the commissions have gone down and also where the splits have gone down or gone up. So the splits have gone up. because there's too many agents. And if you're a low producing agent, you're probably not going to get a good split and all that. But if typically like the agents at our office that have really high splits where we barely make anything, they're very high producing. And then on the other end, when you're in a lopsided seller's market, the commissions can be whatever because the public thinks, oh, I just put a sign in the yard and I get offers and I don't need an agent, that kind of mindset. So when there's such a discrepancy between buyers and sellers, commissions are always going to be under pressure. But on the flip side, if you turn into a bigger buyer's market, then you're going to have new construction developers offering agent bonuses more, commissions going up a little more, and all that kind of stuff. And we're already starting to see that, I think, a little bit now. But I think with the commissions itself, it's like free market. When it's a seller's market, commissions go down. When it's a buyer's market, commissions start to go up. But I think the barrier to entry, if you make that a little tighter, then that will also fix the commission issue.
When you say barrier to entry, I mean, I know what you mean, and I think most people that are going to watch this are going to know what you mean. But in what ways would you make it tighter if it were up to you?
I think more education is important. And looking at what it takes to be an appraiser, you have to be an apprentice for a period of time, and then you become an appraiser. And if they had some kind of extra hoops to jump through, more training, I think, when you go through the agent training, it's all the rules, regulations, laws, whatever. But once you go through that, some of these people, they can't even write a professional email. They can't, they don't have good grammar. They can't spell something. They, don't know professional etiquette, how to handle a phone call, what the response rate should be, how to politically handle, professional settings. So I think that professional training to be a, entrepreneur, business person, how to actually be a salesperson is super important. All that's missing from it. Mm-hmm. And, there's a debate where, oh, you should have a college degree or not have a college degree. And, that's a bigger debate right now going on in general. But I do think, 60 hours of class and taking a test as many times as you want isn't enough to get that. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think in our business, we've, aside from being in the business years ago and then now working with agents all the time, I think one of the biggest things, professionalism is an issue, I think, in a lot of cases. And most agents, I would say the majority of them are selling houses. They're not running businesses. Mm-hmm. And it's like, when they take the classes, they're just kind of teaching them real estate stuff. But in reality, on paper, you might know more than the general public when you finish those classes, but you still don't know anything till you start doing it. So would it be something to potentially add like business knowledge portion of that test? Is that something that should be added to the test or required maybe by the Realtor Association to kind of pass this before you get in? Or
yeah, I would think so. And just any kind of like professional, not ethics is, people talk about ethics all the time, but I think any kind of professional training, business training, entrepreneur training is super important. And a lot of that falls on the brokerages, which, I don't think is really fair, but, you can kind of discuss that. But yeah, I think that should be part of it. And, it's such a big purchase for so many people, or big investment, big sale, whatever, big life altering experience where it's really important. Yeah. So yeah, I think that should be definitely addressed.
On the flip side, the funny thing is that I have a handful of young agents that we work with, didn't go to college. Some of them are 19, 20 years old, and they are out there kicking ass. They're hitting the phones. They're like the ideal agent that you would want in your brokerage to like start at like, hey, they're sponges. They're coming in. They're either working through it themselves, but being very diligent or getting on some teams and just soaking it all in. And it's like, man, these are the agents that's like, they're putting some of the people that have had licenses for decade plus to shame right now. And it's like, you kind of don't want to take that away from them, but some of it, you gotta put it on the general public for hiring. And I remember shooting a house, and I'm not going to say anything while I'm there, with this agent who is in there telling right as everything started exploding in COVID, and it was not a buyer's market. And this guy's in the house telling me, "Oh, it's a buyer's market." I'm like, but yeah, I mean, it's crazy. But I agree with you. Being around a lot of agents, working with a lot of agents, biggest problem, aside from what we talked about, biggest problem in the industry on the agent side, how can we fix it? What advice would you give to an agent who's looking to who's watching this that says, hey, maybe that's me. What can I do to improve?
Yeah, so I think, just like anything in life, you really get what you put into it, especially with this business. And, if anybody's getting into it looking for an easy ride, it's not at all. It's extremely difficult, especially it's, 100% commission based. The market is constantly fluctuating and we're in definitely a transitional period right now. So I would say, you get what you put into it. I've never seen anybody that has busted their butt doing it and hasn't been successful. Just like those, young new agents you were talking about, hitting the phones. And I think the biggest piece of it is, it's kind of tough for a new agent, especially because nobody wants to work with somebody new. I mean, if you break your arm and you go to the hospital, you'd rather hire the old gentleman that's done 100 surgeries versus Doogie Howser that's done one surgery, right? So nobody wants to work with something new. So that's definitely a challenge. But I think if you leverage, a team, a brand name, a whatever, that gives you a little bit extra credibility. And then additionally, taking advantage of whatever you have where, if you're young and you're tech savvy, social media, if you're an older person, okay, maybe you go to, network at the gym or whatever you do. And I think the biggest thing is, a lot of agents, they get into it and they're like, all right, how do I spend my money marketing? And it's like, you should really do all the stuff that's free first. So, circle of influence, so important. If you get into the business and everybody that doesn't know you're an agent, then you shouldn't be marketing.
Don't be the secret agent.
Yeah. First thing is everybody should know that you're an agent. Scream it from the mountaintops. Stay in touch with your network. Stay in touch with all your friends. And for us personally, something big that led to our success is I was born in Norristown, raised in Exton, Downingtown area, lived here my whole life, went to college at Drexel. So I've been here my whole life, developed a network, lots of friends, and like a lot of my customers now are still kids I knew from elementary school. So that really helps, and that's a big advantage if you have that. But I think your circle of influence network super important, and just busting your butt.
Awesome. No, I think that's great advice. And even for the seasoned agents, it sounds like for a new agent, that's like, this is how I get started. For a seasoned agent, that's more like get back to the basics. Like maybe you found success, the market got tough and switched. Now you have to get back to what got you to where you were in the first place, which is all the stuff that you just mentioned. Okay, so when I had my license, I never really dealt with a broker during a deal, except for one time. So I was putting an offer in on a house, and the agent, I still think analyzing like, hey, this is a good priced offer for this house, looking at all the numbers, all that stuff. I was very confident in what we went in at, and the agent said, we're taking another offer. I'm like, there's no way. It was just like a shock because I was like, we offered over, we did all the, I was like, there's no way they're not accepting this offer. And to find out later, the agent kind of had an attitude, was telling me that to find out she was getting the other end of the deal.
Shocker.
And I said, but you're obligated to present my offer. Did you present it? Well, we don't have to do that. And I said, well, I want to see that I said, did you sign the offer yet? And the other one yet? And she said, no. And I said, I want to see, I would like some, acknowledgement that our offer was seen. Wouldn't give it to me. Ended up having to call in the broker. The broker talked to that agent. We ended up getting the house because the offer was presented. So that's a scenario. That's just one of many avenues, I guess, a broker could get involved in there. Do you have any stories of anything that you had to deal with? It doesn't have to be like that, but just something where you had to get involved on a deal with your agents.
Unfortunately, yes, all the time. I've had a couple situations like you mentioned. And, in this business, unfortunately, especially when transaction volume is tight, even for the top agents, which it has been for a while. Unfortunately, agents are desperate. They only make their money off commission, and they do desperate things, whether it's, best for their client or not. It's unfortunate, but it does happen. But a couple instances, I'm not going to name names, but we had another outside agent actually slashed the tires of one of our agents and over a listing that she lost to our agent. And I'm not talking about like a $200,000 listing and, whatever. I'm talking about like a $2 million listing in a very
Wow.
prominent neighborhood.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, stuff like that. And I can talk about many horror stories in property management. But on that end of it, there's been instances like that. There's been instances over, the other side not paying commission and disputing it at closing, or trying to change back when commissions were listed on MLS and advertised, we would have some people change the commission right before the settlement date. And since we've started, I've been through this before. I always tell the agents, hey, before you submit your offer, make a PDF of the MLS sheet. We still do it, even though it doesn't show the commission. We've always done it, so you can snapshot the advertising and what they're saying is included, what's not included.
Yep.
Whatever they're advertising. But before, it would also help with the commission if they do anything like that. So there's unfortunately been many situations. Yeah.
Hey, the perks of being broker owner, right?
Yeah.
Okay, just last thing on this topic. How important, a lot of times with the broker in an office, right? You'll have it'll be broker, and then there'll be like a team leader who's in there, and you don't hear much from a broker. Is that how it should be, or is the broker's relationship actually important with the agents?
I think it is important, and it depends on how your business is modeled or operating. Like for us, we have 30 realtors, about 5 admin staff, 5 staff on maintenance and accountants and whatever. So for us being small, it is very important. So I do maintain that contact. They all have my cell phone number. I talk to them regularly. And we do have an office manager who has a very good relationship with everyone, and they have a relationship with her as well. But I think for our size, it is very important. But if you have a brokerage with 1,000 agents, that's very difficult. So you might have multiple team leaders, multiple managers, et cetera. But you also have to think about where is the agent's loyalty lie when you have a business that you're not super involved. So if you have 1,000 agent business and you have multiple team leaders or managers, whatever, well, those agents at the bottom or in the cog might only be loyal to that team leader. So if that team leader decides to go somewhere else or do something else, they're loyal to them, not to the broker or the brokerage. So I think it really depends. But for our business, it is important for us to lead from the front. So I think that is critical. And, I think also somewhat, I'm not saying inappropriate, but it can be inappropriate if the broker is doing a lot of transactions, because I think that can be a little bit of a conflict of interest. But and for us, I have a team. I don't do sales because I hate sales. But and you'd think, how do you get here with hating sales? You just do what you have to do to get to succeed. But most of my own sales and leads, I just pass off to my team. I don't do much myself. But if there are certain situations where it's like a kid that I've been friends with since elementary school and he has to work with me, or somebody that has to have me, sure, I'll be involved. But that's kind of how we operate.
Okay, fair enough. All right, let's shift over to property management. So we have a handful of clients ourselves, been agents for a while, been working with them for a while, and in the last handful of years, a lot of them have dabbled in or kind of started separate businesses where they're doing property management. Talk a little bit give me an overview of your experience or relationship with the property management business.
Sure. So not to go on a long story, but I'll kind of tell you how we started. So originally, I always wanted to own a lot of real estate, buy a lot of real estate. That was my passion. And, when I was younger, I had, like 20, 30 properties, accumulated, units, et cetera, had a bunch of customers and friends that were investors. And I was managing everything myself. And, I got to the point where I was like, this isn't a good use of my time. Let me hire a different management company. So we hired a management company. It was a terrible experience. All our maintenance miraculously increased. Everything was more, breaking down all of a sudden because they were hiring cousin Joey to fix it, whatever. And we had vacancies. Then we fired them, went to another one, and it was kind of the same experience across the board. And we were like, screw this, we need to do it ourselves again. So we brought in ourselves again, and we were managing it. And what we realized was basically, I think for the most part, unless you're managing 50 units or more, it's not really worth it to have a property management business, considering, overhead, all the liability, all those pieces of it. It's not an easy business to make profitable with low volume, but it worked because I owned a lot of the properties, so I wanted them managed properly anyway. I didn't care about making money off the property management business, but that slowly grew and grew, and we had a lot of investor clients that were buying properties through us. So we grew that to where it is now, where it's, especially with this low transaction, economy that we see in the market, it's been tremendous, helping our business, be prosper during these times. So we're super happy with it. It's been steadily growing, even though we barely advertise it. It's been, great. And, there is a lot of mom and pop landlord investors out there, and especially in Philadelphia and the suburbs everywhere. So it's been great for us. We're very happy, and we're happy with the growth. We have an amazing team finally, after years of kind of going through it. But yeah, we're happy with it. It's just tough when you have only a few units to manage. Making $100-200 a month off of a rental unit isn't enough for the headaches that arise. Because with that business, you might get paid 1 month for doing nothing because you had no headaches. Well, if you have a lot of volume, that never happens.
Totally.
But if you have low volume, you might get paid for doing nothing. But then the next month, you're getting paid $5 an hour because you have to be so involved and you have so much stress. You can't sleep at night. There's this happening, leaks happening, whatever. But I have a good amount of horror stories from that business for sure.
I bet.
Yeah.
What's the threshold, would you say, as far as number of units you think that where it starts to be worth it?
I would say 50, and it also depends on the rents. But if you have like 50 units, let's say average rent is $1,500 a month, that's about $75,000 a month. And if you're making an average, and with the management fees, they've also been under pressure. So I would say with our management fees, we're anywhere from usually 10 to a minimum of maybe 7 or 6%. And, the 10% per month is, if you give us one unit that's a Section 8 or a one unit that's a student rental, kind of a headache, management situation. And the 7 or 6% might be if you give us 50 units in Rittenhouse Square, or we might even charge less for something like that. But, that's just kind of the two ends of it. But what's, let's say your average fee is 8% on, 75,000. Okay. So you're making, what is that, about, $1,500 a month, something like that. So yeah, I mean, I think at that point, considering the headaches and overhead, that's kind of the minimum that it would make it worth it.
Obviously you want the multi-unit properties, right? But when you get to a certain point, is it something that like, and I guess talk from your experience, it probably, once you get to that threshold where it starts to be worth it, do you stop taking on the single units and stuff, or does it become easier to take those on once you get that baseline for yourself?
I've always had the mindset across the board, where we'll kind of take anything and do anything, whether it's commercial, residential, rental, whatever. We never say no to business. But it's not necessarily the business, and not to sound silly, but it's really like the people that we're dealing with. So if we get an owner where, let's say he has a $1 million condo he wants us to manage, and the rent's, $10,000 a month, $5,000 a month, whatever, perfect, amazing, great location, great tenants, etc. But if that owner is the type of person where, we call them and say, hey, there's a leak in the building, you need to fix this immediately. And they fight us on it and they don't fix it and they go back and forth, or there's a major issue where it's obvious they have to do something, or there's mold growing in the house and there's children living there, you need to address this immediately, and they fight us on it and make headaches for us, we fire that customer regardless of what we're managing for them. Because, we're kind of the middleman, and property management, I hate to say it, you're almost always the bad guy to the owner, they think you're kind of ripping them off and saying, hey, you need repairs, even though they don't, and inflating costs. And to the tenant, they think that you're the one making the decisions on what to do with the property.
Right.
It's like, hey, the owner's a cheapskate and a jerk, and he's not fixing it. So we kind of, and when you're desperate for business and a small business, that can be more challenging. But I think with where we are now, we're comfortable saying, hey, we don't want to work with you, or, it doesn't fit our model.
If I'm a real estate agent doing residential and I think that maybe this is something to get into, is it feasible to do it as a one man or woman show? Let's start with that. Is that feasible to do as a one?
Yes, but you need a good network. So, I believe in people's abilities to rise to the occasion all the time. So I think with property management, most important is you need to be really organized and have a good, accounting, whether you use spreadsheets, software, whatever. You need to be super organized because, a lot of people don't realize they get into it, but you need to have a good knowledge of accounting and, Google and research the IRS Schedule E form, the deductions, know how 1099s work because you have to 1099 the owners for their rent. You have to 1099 the contractors for what you pay them, all those aspects of it. And also have really good relationships with contractors and maintenance people, because that is really the hardest piece of it. The contractors and the maintenance people, they can ruin your business. We've dealt with, a lot of crooks, a lot of good ones, a lot of bad ones, etc. And, if you have a bad contractor or maintenance person and they put you in a position where they didn't do the right work and you're stuck between the owner and they kind of robbed the owner of their money or whatever, that can be a giant headache, or did something not to code and the building burns down, etc. That could be.
So you basically just said that it's not for most people.
It's pretty much. And so after I graduated college and through college, I worked as a civil engineering consultant at an engineering firm for 8 years while I was doing my, real estate business. So having that corporate background really helped me organize our business how it should be too. So
okay. Let's say I am an agent. I got into it. I'm picking up a unit at a time here and there. Maybe it's some Section 8, maybe it's, whatever. How do I go about, help that person with give that person some guidance as to how they could go about going after more multi-unit stuff?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is networking. And, you want to network with other brokers and agents that don't want to do property management. And there's plenty of them out there. A lot of people don't want to do it. So if you network with other brokers and agents that don't want to do property management and work out some kind of referral relationship, they don't want to do it anyway. They're giving it away where they're not getting possibly anything already. That is a great start. But just in general, networking with other investors, other developers is huge. Contractors, they can give you leads as well. And then advertising is also important, I think, because, with the real estate sales side of it, it's like advertising is everywhere. But with property management, you don't notice it as much, and it's not as much out there. But I do think, I do believe in the kind of greater, this is up for debate and, maybe conspiratorial, whatever, but the greater theme of not saying renter nation, but there is more and more rentals, coming on the market, a lot of investors, more of that. So I do think property management is going to continue to grow and kind of be where a lot of the action is, and a big part of the real estate business going forward. But I think, if somebody's thinking about getting into it, it's a grind and you're going to have to, suck it up until you grow it. But I think as long as you network appropriately, that's huge.
And things like investor meetup groups, things like that would probably be a good place to could hit. Okay. And then last thing here that I'm going to transition into investing a little bit is, so do you know who Grant Cardone is?
Of course.
Okay. Yep. So one thing he's talked about is if you are an investor, he's big on going big. At minimum, he talks about 12 to 16 units. Investing in a property like that is where it becomes viable to bring on a property management. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. So full disclosure, I'm not a huge
No. I know. I'm just using it as
sure.
a reference for the conversation.
But that I'm trying to set it up. But I think a lot of what these online gurus and there's a lot of good ones. What they do is they try to do clickbait kind of headline attention getter stuff. But if you're, when I started, I was poor. So the first property I bought was a, $130,000 townhouse in Thorndale. And, for when you first start and you don't have credit, you don't have income, you don't have anything, like that just seems like an impossible pipe dream. And you kind of have to start somewhere. So I would say, start somewhere. But I think no matter what, all that matters is getting a good deal. Whether you buy 1 unit, 20 units, whatever, getting a good deal. And then you leverage that one first good deal to get another good deal and another good deal and another good deal. Whether it's, $100,000 property, 200,000, 300,000. But I do agree, if you can do that and you're in a position to do that, yes, the larger multifamily, larger land developments, all that stuff is great.
Yeah. And I think obviously not everybody can start there, right? But I, looked at the math on something, it really does start to make more sense when you get up there. But can you agree with that it's like around that ballpark, 12 to 16 units is where that expense of a property management company starts making more sense? Or is it earlier than that, later than that? Because I mean, like, people get into investing in properties and they think it's, it's going to get me out of the rat race. But if you can't have that property manager, you're still in the rat race because you're doing it all yourself.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is, what is the value of your time, right?
Right.
If you are going to hire a property management company and sit on your butt, then no, you should do it yourself. But if you're a high-powered doctor, lawyer, attorney, whatever, and your time is a lot more valuable than managing the property, then no, even if you have 1 unit, hire a property manager. So I think it depends on the value of your time. But if you're also looking to like accumulate real estate and get into the business, no matter what your time is worth, you should learn what it takes to manage a property and do it yourself for a short period of time. So when you hire a property manager, you don't get ripped off and they don't inflate whatever and BS you, essentially. So, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so give us a little overview of your experience in real estate investing. How many units you got, those type of things.
Sure. So I'm at 80 units now myself.
Nice.
And it's been a grind. I started very young. I started buying real estate when I was 18, read Rich Dad, Poor Dad when I was in high school. My brother was a mortgage broker when he's 5 years older than me. So he started his business and, we were before the financial crisis. So I was getting 103% loans, 106% financing, all that stuff, no doc, et cetera. And I accumulated I remember it sticks in my head, like over 21 properties, by the time I was 21. And I was like, oh my God, like I'm the man, untouchable, really believing my own myth. And then the financial crisis happened and I was kind of struggling and hurting a lot. I think it's never as good as you think it is, but it's also never as bad as you think it is. But during that time, went through a lot of turmoil, lost some properties, struggled, et cetera. And then, long story short, came out of that, built it back up, and kind of kept going. But yeah, I definitely, at this point, like the things I buy anything as long as it's a good deal still. I don't care if it's $100,000 lot in Philadelphia. I don't care if it's a $2 million, piece of land or a $5 million, commercial building, whatever it is. As long as I'm paying less than what it's worth, then I'm happy doing that. It's my passion. And, the bigger picture of investing, you want to have kind of a macro view of things where, if you look at the big picture, like, okay, where, and you can apply this formula to anywhere almost in the world where, okay, what's the jobs market where this property is? What's the crime rate? How's the school district? Where is the major airport? What's the highway system? How far is it from major grocery stores, hospitals, whatever? I think, a lot of people don't think about that stuff, but it's super important with the long-term appreciation, prosperity of that property. So those are a lot of things that I look at. And you can get into so many angles of it, but those things are important.
How many units are you looking at to acquire one?
I'm kind of one of those people where I want to live to my maximum potential, not to sound silly or guru type.
No.
But as long as, and I have kids now, I have all these things, and in my mind, it's like, I'm doing all this for my kids, kids, etc. So I'm going to do it as long as I can do it and make it as big as I can make it. And that mindset can sometimes stress you out and burn you out. But trying to not get burned out, trying to enjoy life also, is important. But I just, my goal is to see how far we can take it.
But are you looking at like 100 units? Are you looking at 50 units, 20 units? Before you acquire one? Because I know some people that look at a shitload of properties before they end up picking one up. Like, does that number come down with experience, or is it just the market is what it is and you have to look at a lot, or don't?
Yeah. So, it's I used to be a lot more aggressive, and for me, it's all about business decision. It's not emotional. So, I would love to buy as much as possible, but it's just been really challenging with making things make sense where prices have gone and construction costs both. And then on top of that, interest rates with lending has become tighter. So I would love to be putting out a lot more offers, and I am putting a lot more out now than I was like within the last year.
Okay.
But I'd love to done more. It's just economically, it was hard to make it make sense. But now I am putting out multiple offers every week for myself.
Okay.
And they are aggressive, and a lot of them don't get accepted and don't get through, but a few get through here and there, and we go under contract and we do our analysis of, hey, what is a good deal on this? Does it make sense? And we usually we don't even chase properties that much that just came on the market. And we've gotten some good deals where one of my buddies would be like, oh my God, how did you buy this? Like, this is such a good deal. And it's like, dude, it was sitting on the market for a year and nobody wanted it.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of people miss that stuff.
Are you ever paying a premium for a property based on potential and or the cash flow makes sense?
Yes, we have done that. And that comes with doing your homework as to, like if you have a big value add potential on the property where, hey, I'm overpaying for this rancher, but it's got an acre and I can make an addition on it and it'll, do this to the price. Or, oh, I'm overpaying for this, 1-floor commercial building, but you can build 3 apartments on top of it. So that value add potential, or, if somebody was, I hate to say, managing the property poorly and all the rents are below market and you have the potential of updating them and increasing the rents. So we've definitely done that. Yeah.
Okay. And then quick yes or no from an experienced real estate investor. I've heard it from a lot of people. The answer seems to be consistent. Rich dad, poor dad, high recommend or forget about it?
High recommend, but, I think it's not to sound, it's not super critical that you do it this way, but I really like it for younger people. Like,
Okay.
I think if you're in high school, early college, that's like the perfect time to read it. I think once you're like 40, 50, it's kind of, it seems a little maybe elementary or not, as relevant, but I think for younger people for sure.
And then briefly, during COVID, I heard from a lot of people I know with a lot of properties that they ran into a lot of problems with not being able to collect rent and stuff during COVID. Did you run into that? And if you did, is that something that, with hindsight, if a scenario ever like that ever happened again like that, is there anything you could do to mitigate it or ease it?
Yeah. So luckily, we didn't run into too many issues. We had some, I would say, out of the 100% that we manage, maybe 10-15% of them had issues like that, but it wasn't a huge number, luckily. And I'm kind of thinking part of that might be because of our area has good economics, jobs, kind of pretty affluent. So we didn't have too many, but we did have some. And not to go on a tangent, but it's kind of a little also, like, I think, unfair where people say, hey, look, you don't have to, the government said, you don't have to pay your mortgage, or banks saying you don't have to pay your mortgage, et cetera, but whatever you didn't pay got added to your mortgage balance. Mm-hmm. Well, and we have landlords that have mortgages, but if your tenant wasn't paying, that wasn't added to a debt that they were later had to pay. So it wasn't really a fair trade-off with how that went down. But we also did work with some people and gave them some, breaks. And we like to, run our business like, with compassion. We care about people
Sure.
and don't want to hurt anyone. So it was a little bit of a struggle, but knock on wood, we didn't go through it too bad.
Is there anything you, like I said, if you did it, if it happened again, could you have done anything different that could have helped?
I think so. So to be fair, we had like the best years in our business during COVID,
Okay.
and especially with the sales side and everything else. But the people that we didn't notice, that it was kind of a catch-22 where we had also a lot of student rentals. Temple, Drexel, UPenn, that area, St. Joe's, and that was kind of a mixed bag where either they were paying full rent and it was great because their parents were paying the rent, etc., or we got completely screwed because the school was out and everybody left. So some of those were problematic, and I would say the most important thing for any investor, any owner that they miss is having a nest egg. As much as cliche as that is, you should really have a few like 6 months of expenses, 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up, 3 months minimum. In case something major happens, or in case something like that happens where you're not getting rent. And everybody is unfortunately like so leveraged. All our investors, from the biggest ones to the smallest ones, the ones that have 100 units, the ones that have 10 units, they're all like, a lot of them are leveraged to the gills. So having that is super important.
All right. I want to talk about and let you kind of talk about your development end of things. You got a pretty cool project going on right now.
Yeah, I mean it's super infancy stage. It's in the Schwenksville area, just outside of Collegeville, next town over. But we have a piece of land about 5.5 acres. We were originally trying to build 30 plus townhouses, but now it's whittled down to 24, and we're just in the beginning of it. So we're going to the planning commission, doing a presentation, see how that goes. But we're going for 24, but it's not, nothing is easy. It's kind of like in the side of a hill a little bit, so you have to do some major site development. And I think for any developer, most of them know that that's like the biggest thing that kills most projects is the site development, because it's such a question mark for a lot of it, until you do your soil testing and all figure out all your utilities and stormwater management, all that. So I think with the development business, it's pretty tough because you have to spend like a lot of money to get to that point where you realize, oh, it doesn't even work. So all that that 60 grand I spent goes down the toilet. But it's kind of high risk, high reward. And with a lot of our, you know, I think the hardest working people are also the luckiest people. So we have gotten lucky a couple times where I think we're in a good position now where we've kind of wound down. Most of our projects are finished or just about getting finished. And, I think it kind of works out where, with where markets are, the economy, I think if you listen to different economists, they say a lot of different things. But I'm really hoping that construction prices come down. And we're going through that design development phase now on a couple of different projects. And hopefully by the time the design development is done and we put a shovel in the ground, construction costs have gone down. But a lot of people say, oh, that's a pipe dream, whatever. But you never know. So
Your first project like this?
this will be one of the biggest projects I've done on the 5.5 acres. Before that, we've done a couple like row of four townhouses, couple of duplexes, triplexes, quads. But this will be one of the largest that we've done. And before that, when I was a civil engineering consultant, I worked on a lot of like big mega infrastructure projects.
So
kind
you
of
had
thing.
experience.
Yeah.
Sounds like your background is helping you out a lot with that. Is it feasible for somebody who has the cash to do it?
So I think a smart business person that has money can do anything, because you have to. If you're, and when I say smart, I mean knowing what you know and what you don't know, and hiring the best people for the things that you don't know. But also people that just because they're the best doesn't mean you can trust them either. So that's also a part of it, and you kind of get what you pay for. A lot of new developers or new investors, they try to go the cheapest contractor, and you end up losing like so much more than if you were hired the best one and paid a premium.
Yep.
Or the cheapest architect, and then you lose so much more if you would have hired the more expensive one. So I think it's not all about cutting every corner and cost. You really need the best, and best reputation and guys you can trust.
Okay. Why did you decide to go this route with development?
before me, my grandfather, used to have a construction business. My dad was a civil engineer, and I grew up in very modest means, to say the least. I actually grew up in Marchwood Apartments. I don't know if you know
I
Marchwood
do.
Apartments. But yeah, I lived there for, I don't know, 15 years of my life, sharing a bedroom with my brother, all that kind of stuff. So we never had a house, until I was like, and then when we grew up, we got a townhouse in Rhonda,
Hmm.
whatever. But, we never had like a house or land or a lot of money or whatever. So at a super young age, as long as I can remember, I was like, okay, my priorities are I want to not be poor and I want to own a house and I want to own property. So that kind of started pretty young. And then my brother went to Drexel for computer engineering. So I was like, okay, might as well go to Drexel for engineering. And then I went to Drexel for biomedical engineering. I was like, all right, I'm not good at chemistry and biology, so I'll go to the easier engineering, civil engineering. And it kind of all went from there.
Awesome. You seem like, from the conversation, it's like you see something, you're like, hey, let's go for this, let's go for that. Like you have a real, not to be cheesy, a go-getter attitude about a lot of this stuff. Are you done yet?
Oh no, far from it. And I think I was always driven and motivated, just because I always had that like chip on my shoulder where it's like, I'll show them, or whoever said no to me is gonna regret it, and
Yeah.
that only gets you so far, I think. And I think once you get to, I'm 39 now, but as you get older, and a lot of people, they're anti starting a family, pro starting a family, whatever, everybody's
Hmm.
different. But I do think, having kids has like reignited that fire. And I think one of the most important things when you're a kid is you want your parents to be proud of you. A lot of people are like that. And I think when you get to this age, it's so important, in my opinion, to have kids and start a family, because it reignites that fire where you want your kids to be proud of you. It's kind of like in reverse.
Yeah.
And that is something super important to me, and I want my kids to be like, oh, that like savage Jack badass is my dad. So that kind of mindset, I think, reignites it a little bit.
What's something that hasn't happened yet, or you haven't tried to attack yet, that is on the list for the future?
So I've always been a like get in the trenches and just do the work. I don't like when I still do. I like to like have fun and party and whatever, who
Sure.
doesn't, and have a social life. But I always for business purposes like to be in the trenches, and very like anti social media and all that stuff. But you realize in this day and age, like social media is the most important thing, one of the most important things you can do and have for business. So we've been growing our social media steadily for the last maybe 10 years and doing a good job at it. But we also want to break into the podcast space, so I appreciate you having me, and hopefully
Absolutely.
you'll be a guest on our show one day.
Yeah.
But we're definitely trying to get break into that, and get that going. But with everything else, like I've been trying to do the podcast for maybe a year now. As embarrassing as that sounds, but when you have kids, 5 different businesses,
a
all
lot.
these things going on,
Yeah.
but it'll happen eventually.
Yeah. Awesome. Absolutely. All right. That's basically it. We're coming up on the end, and we ask every one of our guests to send us off with a positive message to the world.
So I think, going back to what I said earlier, but I think it's so important. It's never as bad as it seems, and it's never as good as it seems. So if you're ever in a tough spot, it's never as bad as it seems, especially when you're younger. You're in high school, you break up with your girlfriend, it's the end of the world, like blah, blah, blah. But as you get older, like, maybe that was the best thing that ever happened to me. So, don't get too hung up on the negatives. And, even when it's great, be cautious, be careful. It's never as good as it seems either.
Love it, man. Thank you.
Of course.
It was
Thank
great.
you. Appreciate it.
Cool.